As sports history fans, we often reminisce about the legends. Willis Reed limping on to the NBA Finals court, Kurt Schilling's bloody sock, Kerry Strug's courageous dismount, and so many more. These moments often define sports history. But what about the countless injuries that did not become legends, or careers that were derailed due to inadequate care? That's where this episode's sponsor comes in. Introducing to you, ILP Sports Consultants, your trusted sports injury partner, available 24/7. Brian Maelli at ILP Sports Consultants has over 20 years of experience in the orthopedic and sports medicine industry, and he has worked with athletes across the gamut, from youth to amateurs, professionals, in almost every sport played in the United States of America, accommodating athletes at every stage of their career. This adaptability ensures that ILP services are perfectly tailored to your skill level, no matter where you are in your athletic journey. With ILP, you are in control. Choose the steps that matter most to you. Diagnosis, treatment plan, recovery, or the whole journey. ILP services are tailored to your unique needs. Rushing for care is a common pitfall, leading to future problems. ILP Sports Consultants helps you make the right decisions, ensuring that you receive timely and safe care. And here's a bonus. Brian hosts the Injured List podcast, sharing insights and athlete stories you won't want to miss. Whether you're a concerned parent or grandparent, or an athlete yourself seeking guidance, ILP Sports Consultants is your beacon of hope in sports injury management. Visit ilpsports.com today. That's the letters ilpsports.com. ILP Sports Consultants, where your well-being is the priority and your recovery is the mission. Choose ILP Sports Consultants for a healthier sports journey, helping you get back in the game the smart way.
There are fixtures at almost every sporting event that you go to, on the gridiron, the baseball diamond, and in the gym. The scoreboards. And there's one man from the 19th century that's responsible for most of the design, including that of the gridiron. Timothy P. Brown of FootballArchaeology.com joins us to tell us about the Irwin scoreboards and Arthur Irwin, its founder. Coming up right after this.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history on a day-to-day basis. Your host, Darren Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time. So as we come out of the tunnel of the Sports History Network, let's take the field and go no huddle through the portal of positive gridiron history with pigskindispatch.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of pigskindispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pig Pen, your portal to positive football history. And welcome to another evening where we get to be honored with the presence of Timothy P. Brown of FootballArchaeology.com. Tim, welcome back to the Pig Pen.
Hey, thanks, Darren. And the honor is all mine, sir.
No, it's myself and the listeners. We get this weekly treat where you reminisce about a piece that you've wrote recently and your daily tidbits, and we get to talk to you about it, pick your brain, and learn something new about football history. And tonight we're going to go up on the scoreboard and learn a little bit about that and some association with another sport. Then I'll let you talk about this gentleman and his invention.
Yeah, so this is one of my favorite stories in a while, largely because this is one where I just really learned something, and it's one of those where, I don't know, I've probably put in 20, 30, 40 hours of research in the past on maybe more, on a couple of different topics related to early scoreboards and game simulations and things like that. And I'd always seen them as kind of three separate things floating around, in the ether, that weren't connected. And then for some reason I was, checking into, doing another dig on scoreboards, and I came across a mention of an Irwin scoreboard, which if I'd seen it before, I don't remember it. So I dig into that, and all of a sudden it's like everything makes sense and everything is connected, so was just like this great revelation for me. So, I mean, the story is that there's this guy, Arthur Irwin, who, perhaps people who are into old time baseball would know, because he played like 13 years in the majors. The latter part of his playing career, he was a player manager, and then he, once he was done playing, he continued managing. So there was a point in his career where he's managing the Phillies, and as was the case back then, baseball players needed jobs after the season. So being an athlete, he ended up getting a job as a trainer at Penn, University of Pennsylvania. So, back then the trainers were like they were the guys who would physically condition athletes across sports. They were the guys who would diagnose, they didn't have sports medicine per se back then. So they were the guys who'd figure out how to resolve a Charlie horse or whatever it was, how to, fix a sprain, tape them up. So that was his role. But while he's there, he ends up designing and building a scoreboard. And I think it was actually before they had Franklin Field, but he builds a scoreboard for for Penn, because prior to that, everybody used baseball scoreboards. If they were in a baseball stadium, or they didn't have any scoreboards. So he builds this thing, and it's got the rudiments of what scoreboards have today. Down and distance. It said who had the ball. Who was in possession. It had a little thing up at the top, a little kind of a football field graphic that they'd move this football along, as the team progressed on the field. So things like that. Then he ends up patenting it. So, there's drawings on his patent application that shows this, the format of his scoreboard. And then I found a couple of early photographs of his scoreboards, up there on fields, and it looks, just like his patent application. So then what happens is, he builds a business. Well, he builds multiple scoreboards, and in some cases permanently installs them in locations, and in other cases, like, he moves them around. They're like the Goodyear blimp; they show up at different places. But he's hired to do it, and then he has people. He staffs the operation when a scoreboard is being used, and in the course of all that, they had to develop a system of, they didn't have really telephones on the field, and they didn't have walkie-talkies or those kinds of things. So they developed this kind of signal system, what back in the day they would call wigwagging. So a guy or two on the field would follow the plays, and use these contortions, something similar to the semaphore flags of in the military, or like referee signals. They contorted their bodies, or they spelled out letters, and they would essentially communicate to the guys operating the scoreboard the down and distance, who had substituted in, whatever information that they had. And so it became this thing that for the big games in the East, you pretty much it became an expectation. You have an Irwin scoreboard up there, and everybody knew what Irwin scoreboard was. So when they built Harvard Stadium, then I think they built. I've never gotten I've got one image that isn't too great of an early scoreboard there. So I think it was an advanced version of an Irwin scoreboard, but he ends up hiring a guy who, his name was Eddie Morris. He ends up being the wigwagger. He had a red sweater that he always wore and a white hat. And for like 20 years, everybody at Harvard Stadium knew this guy was following along. Sometimes he'd be out on the field doing his signals up to the guys in the box, or up on the scoreboard. And so he became it's like before mascots, he became like one of the mascots, something like that. And so anyways, then they also started, like at Harvard, he would signal in like who made the tackle, who ran the ball, those kinds of things. And so they were selling, they sold scorecards that had the number of each of the players. Now, the players didn't wear the numbers, but there was a number in the scorecard for Smith and Jones. And then if Smith made the tackle and Jones made the run, they'd signal that. and they'd post the corresponding numbers up on the scoreboard. So it was just a way to, for the people in the stands to kind of know who the heck was who, because nobody wore numbers and they all looked the same, and whatever. And they're just running in these mushes. That was the nature of football at the time. So then eventually, then later on, obviously they added numbers to the players, on their jerseys. The other thing that he did was they would do the Irwin scoreboards in gymnasiums or in theaters. So they do it especially for an away game, and they'd get connected by telephone or telegraph. And then, so it became a thing where, you'd pay some money, go to the theater, and you could watch the game as a simulation based on what was happening down in Philadelphia, if you were in Boston. And they even did it like in Boston, they do games at Harvard because, for the big game, like the Princeton and Yale games, those would sell out. And so people who couldn't get into the game would go to the theater to watch the simulation. And then, so, it's just kind of crazy stuff like that.
Now that image you have from 1893, and listeners, you can go to the show notes, and we have a link that'll take you right to Tim's article, and you can see this image, and it's sort of like a sketch of what the intention of what the board should be for 1893. But it's really interesting because at the top, like you said earlier, they've got a thing called field board, and it's got an image of a football that sort of slides down, and the points of the ball indicate what yard line, I guess, the ball is on for the next down. Yeah. And it almost reminds me of like the modern day, if you're watching an NFL game and you follow on NFL.com or CBS.com and you want to know real play because you can't watch a game or whatever, your wife makes you go shopping or something, you can see, where the plays are going. So it's kind of interesting, 130 some years ago that the similar technology started then. So that's really cool.
Yeah. From a representation. So, and that image is right from it's just the front page of his patent, documents. So yeah, fundamentally, everything that he had listed on his early thing is right there, so, and like you said, I do that where I'm watching one game and I got another one on my computer that I'm just, tracking the progress of the game. Right. So,
right. Yeah, definitely very cool.
So now the other thing that's pretty bizarre about this guy is that he ends up, so at the time, he was a ball player, so he was traveling a lot of the year, and then he would, when he's doing these scoreboards, he's traveling basically on the East Coast. And at one point he was diagnosed, I don't know if he was formally diagnosed with cancer, but basically he was told, you don't have long to live. And so he gets on a boat and going from New York to Boston and fell overboard or just jumped in the water to end it. And so he dies. And then as they're trying to settle his estate, turns out that, kind of came up that he had a wife in New York and another one in Boston. So, with children on.
No wonder he had to keep score. He had to know what was going on.
Yeah. He needed to make some cash.
Yeah.
So anyways, it's a sad end, but so just kind of a bizarre ending to a pretty wild story. But, for me, it just brought together the simulation. So, I now believe his Irwin scoreboard were the first simulations. He was the designer of the first football specific scoreboard. And then, I'd always made a big deal out of the Harvard Stadium score and their wigwag system. And then I, now kind of understand that he was the one behind that, and that his stuff was around, 10 years earlier. Maybe not as quite sophisticated form, but nevertheless.
Definitely very interesting, and it's great that you see especially that image from 1893 and the similarities to our modern scoreboards still carry on the tradition of what he started. It's just fascinating and a great testament, great idea he had. It was pretty brilliant. So great story, Tim. Appreciate you sharing that with us like you do every day on your tidbits that you have from footballarchaeology.com. And maybe you could share with the listeners how they too could get into on the tidbits.
Yeah, so ideally you go to www.footballarchaeology.com and subscribe, and you'll get an email every evening, 7:00 Eastern, with just basically it got the contents of that night's story. You can also just bookmark it and go whenever you want. I also post links on Twitter and on Threads, as well as on the Substack app, because my site, I've got my own name for it, but it's actually a Substack application. So those are the ways to get there and have at it.
Yeah, and help you keep score on the scoreboard each and every night. So,
yes,
so
I do.
Well, we definitely appreciate you sharing the story and bringing some of this football antiquity to us, to our modern day, and making it relevant again, and carrying on and letting us know the name of Arthur Irwin and his great idea that he had, and some great stories from him too.
I also forgot to mention he was the first non-catcher, non-first baseman to wear a glove in the major leagues. And so Spalding then sold the Irwin glove, throughout the 1890s and early aughts. So I forgot to mention that, but that's another, he's a big deal in baseball.
Yeah, wow, definitely all around sports. We can all thank him for the sports that we watch. So, wow, some great stuff, Tim. We appreciate it, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Okay, thanks, Darren. All right, bye-bye.
Peeking up at the clock, the time's running down. We're going to go into victory formation, take a knee, and let this baby run out. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you back tomorrow for the next podcast. We invite you to check out our website, pigskindispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskindispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. Special thanks to the talents of Mike and Jean Monroe, as well as Jason Neff, for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude, and I wanted to thank you for stopping by to listen to another episode here on the Sports History Network. Our podcasters are passionate about uncovering and sharing sports stories from yesteryear. And if you didn't know it already, we have over 30 shows across the network covering all sorts of sports history topics. In fact, here's a glimpse into one of our awesome podcasts here on the network.
Each week, the official Football Learning Academy podcast will take you deep into the history of pro football through interviews with players, coaches, or administrators in the NFL, as well as interviews with Pro Football Hall of Fame selectors, authors, and historians. You'll learn how the game evolved and important moments that shaped the sport into what it is today. And don't miss the Pro Football History Nugget of the Week. Listen to the official Football Learning Academy podcast on the Sports History Network.
How about that? I bet you're super hyped to go listen to that new podcast, right? Well, to learn about this show and all the other podcasts on the network, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com/podcast. Again, that's sportshistorynetwork.com/podcast. Head over there today to find your next favorite sports history podcast.